Special meeting of the common council, City of Oneonta, August 2nd. Call to order.
Mayor Martin.
Here.
Councilmember Murphy.
Here.
Councilmember Mark Davies.
Here.
Councilmember David Risberger.
Here.
Councilmember Caitlin Karshu. Here. Councilmember Mike Larson. Councilmember Scott Harrington. Councilmember John Richter.
Here.
Councilmember Emily Valco. Here.
Hey Scott, can I have you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Which brings us to the matter at hand, and who will begin this?
Obviously, this is a special meeting, the council tonight at 6 o'clock to discuss or introduce the topic of the 2023 budget. We only have an hour tonight, but we'll have many hours beyond that in future meetings that we'll hopefully be scheduling by the end of this 6 o'clock meeting. But first, before we jump into 2023, Jenny had shared a memo yesterday with the council, kind of going over some of the highlights of our current financial picture in 2022. Hopefully everyone got a chance to read through that. And Jenny, if you want to kind of summarize that and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, I'm just going to try to quickly go through this because we are crunched for time. So on the 2022 tax levy, we turned it over to the county as of May 1st, and 90.6% of our total tax bills had gotten paid, and we turned over a total of 169 uncollected bills for tax enforcement. The general fund, the adopted budget to the adjusted budget has increased 1.4 million, which includes 784,000 of re-encumbrances from the prior year. So we've made additions of a little over 694,000 since the beginning of the year, and I've listed them there for you. 290,000 of that being ARPA. And to highlight the major sales tax or the major revenue areas, sales tax, we briefly talked about this at the last council meeting. We were doing quite well at the beginning of the year until we got our July payment. And then we had found out that the way the state distributes the sales tax has been based on an estimate, based on history, until they reconcile the quarterly returns. This all worked out very well as a model until COVID hit. Then the state tried to reorganize how they were transferring the sales tax out to the counties because of where people were relocating. Now that New York City has gotten caught up and all the sales tax are filed, they found that New York City was being shorted their distribution, so now the state has to repay New York City their portion of the sales tax. So the amount that's being paid to the counties has now been greatly decreased, and we're not going to know the final effect until October of 22. So as of right now, I believe that we're going to hit our 2022 budget, but I do not think that we're going to get the anticipated surplus that the first 5 months of the year is projecting. So if you have any further questions on that, I will be happy to answer them.
Questions? Jenny? Anybody?
I'm sorry.
Jim, did you want to just go over that number again? I think it was $694,000 from the general fund.
You mean for us modifying the budget?
Yes.
Yes, and Luke, it's all right there on the bullets.
Okay.
All of those add up to the what we have added to the 2022 budget.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions for Jenny? Okay, thank you.
The ambulance, we're doing well compared to last year. Through January through May, we've done 809 billable ambulance calls as compared to 805 in 2021. We're not quite at the pre-pandemic level, which was 911 in 2019. And just historically, we average about a little over 48% collection for what we bill. Fire protection, this is a formula-based contract that we have with the town of Oneonta, and they pay the city in 3 installments throughout the year, and we have received on their payment. The interest rates are starting to climb, but they are still at a low compared to what they were in 2019. So our interest income really isn't back up to pre-pandemic levels yet. Parking fines are higher than 2021. The main reason for this is because of the increase in the snow removal tickets that the city implemented. So we're doing very well there with those revenues. But the court fines, they are higher than 2021, but they're still not up to where we would get court fines compared to when the criminal justice laws were put into effect. So I don't know if those laws are going to change. I haven't been notified by NICOM.
Excuse me, Jenny.
Yes.
Do you know offhand what the court fines used to be before?
Over 100,000. Over 100,000 a year, so that we've lost quite a bit of money on the court fines there. The state aid, as we discussed before, we've received the same state aid since 2011. We'll touch a little bit more on that in the budget presentation, but we received a small payment in September, and we'll receive the balance at the end of the year in December. The mortgage tax is doing very well. This shows the activity of refinancing and the housing market itself. And so we currently have a surplus there. And we also received our second half of our ARPA payment. And right now it's sitting in a liability. We cannot report it as revenue until all of the ARPA expenses have met the guidelines. Salaries and fringe benefits. We adopted a little over 6.7 million in salary costs, and we are now up to 6.9. And through July 3rd, we've expended a little over 3.3 million, or 48% of the budget. The police overtime to year-to-date is 115,000, and the fire overtime year-to-date is 305. And then fringe benefits, again, we adopted about 4.9 million. And we've modified it to a little over 5 million, and we've expended about 50% of that number year-to-date.
I'd like to go back up to the ambulance charges, and could you just explain a little bit more, expound a little more on why our collection rate is 48.4% of what's billed? Does that represent that in the budget we're getting a higher number for billing than what's actually allowed by insurance, or is there some other reason?
No, it's because in the budget, we budget what we think we are going to actually realize in revenues. But what happens is that we bill, say we bill at $1,600 a call. Then what happens is we have contractual allowances between Medicare, Medicaid, and all the different insurance companies. And what that means, if we participate into those programs, we have to accept their payment as full payment. And so if Blue Cross only pays 80%, I don't want to say Blue Cross, if Medicare or Medicaid don't pay a certain amount, we have to contractually vote off the balance, and we're not able to bill the patient for it. And each insurance company, depending on the law, has different regulations. That's called contractual allowances. But we've got about 7% of our bad debt.
Sure, and that's not bad, having 7.1% is bad debt, but I just kind of want to, is there another approach that we can take to our billing to be more realistic? Because we are budgeting our budget on the revenue that we think we're going to make off the ambulance, but yet we're only collecting 48.4% of what we think we're going to get.
No, let me just modify that statement. We are budgeting what we think we're going to get.
So even when you bill 1,600, you're only budgeting 800?
Correct. So, for example, I don't have the inventory right now with me, but say if we bill 2.6 million in ambulance calls, we're only budgeting 40% of that 2.6 million. Because I know the contractual allowances are going to happen. And then, so I know it's not going to be realized.
So then what is the purpose of billing so much higher then? Who are you trying to capture less than 50% of the time? So 52% of the time, you're not capturing the money that you think you're going to get. What's the purpose of that?
Commercial insurance. We will get a much higher payment with commercial insurances than we do with Medicare and Medicaid.
So then the majority of the ambulance work is Medicare and Medicaid. To drive that number down to 48.4, that's the vast majority of the billing, right?
I want to say it's probably about 50%, if not just a little bit higher. I don't have those stats right in front of me, but I can get them for you. Let's see. Equipment Very quickly, we've had a modified budget of almost $900,000, and I just broke out the outstanding encumbrances there for you between the different areas of the supplemental team to be funded by the reserves. So most of that money is being funded by the reserves. To date, all of our principal payments have been made this year, and all of the related interest to those principal payments, and also our contingency, we budgeted $200,000, we still have a balance of $187,000. But on the general fund balance, I just want to point out that we have $13.9 million at the end of 2021, which is 85% of our 2022 adopted budget. The unrestricted fund balance is 53%, and the reserves are 26%, and then the unrestricted is just about 5%. And as you know, in May of 2022, we added $825,000 to our reserves, which that brings our unrestricted balance down to about 48%. Our target is 35%. I'm very comfortable with the 48%. Any other questions on the general fund? I'm sorry I'm going fast, but I just know we only have an hour.
Any questions?
Water fund, water and sewer funds, I really just want to highlight our water sales and our sewer rents, and also the fund balances. We have, through June, our June's water sales is $91,000 greater than 2021, and which is 67% of our adopted budget. That is very good. And our colleges, our college water sales is $97,000 higher than 2021, and also what we collected to date is 58% of our 22 budget. So we're doing very well with our water budget and our water sales. And the water fund balance, we've talked about this before, it's weak, and right now the unrestricted fund balance is only 5.6% of our budget, and we know that is a fund that we need to work on. And sewer. Our sewer rents are the same as with the water. We are ahead, we're $66,000 greater than 2021, and we collected 72% of our adopted budget. And the college sewer rents is $250,000. Year-to-date, we're $87,000 greater than 21, and again, we collected about 57% of that budget for 2022. And the sewer fund balance, our unrestricted. I'm going to call it unrestricted, just so you know, by law, the sewer fund, the entire fund is restricted. So the language is just a little different for the sewer fund. But what we consider the unrestricted fund balance is about 47% of the 22 budget, and the reserves is about 22%. So the sewer fund balance is much stronger, obviously, than the water. OPT, we ended with a surplus of $188,000 for 2021, and then we still have available to us the $1.1 million in the CARES grant. We have not had to draw down on that money yet, but I'm assuming by fall I will probably be putting in a draw for that. Our fare box revenues are up as compared to last year. The fare box revenues that I'm speaking about are the people who enter the bus and pay either dropping the money into the fare box or they're buying the passes. So we are seeing increased activity there from the previous year. But due to the pandemic and the colleges not being in normal sessions in 2021, we weren't able to fulfill all of our contracts, but 2022 we are back to normal operations and all of the contracts are being fulfilled. However, one problem with, one issue that I would like to point out with OPT is our store revenues are down. It's because our passenger counts are down. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But we do have the CARES funds that will carry the OPT fund for the next couple of years. And so any other questions on the funds? The last thing I want to go over is our bond report. Questions?
Any questions?
Okay, August 9th, we will be issuing $3.6 million worth of bonds, and this is to cover the West Street project, which is $2.2 million, and our NYSIG project is $1.48 million. The maturity schedule is a 12-year period, and our effective rate after receiving the premium is just under 3%, 2.9686%. which I'm very happy about. When they quoted it, they originally quoted it at 3.85%. By receiving this rate, it's saving over $200,000 in interest. And on July 19th, S&P Global rated our bonds AA negative for our long-term rating and our current ones that we will be issuing with a stable outlook. This is excellent. This is the same rating that we received a few years ago. So it's wonderful that all through COVID and the different challenges that we have, our rating did not go down. And I just want to highlight some of the really good things that were in our bond report. They talked about our strong management, our good financial policies, our practices under the way that we present our budgets, the way that we manage our finances. We have a stable financial performance, and they also talked about our management of the pandemic effects. It's right in the report. Our sales tax revenue, our fund balance strength, that was greatly highlighted in the report, saying that it shows that we are being proactive in preparing for the future. They mentioned all of the grants that the city receives, and the colleges, our location to Cooperstown, and they also talked about all of the current projects that the city is involved in. All of these aspects went into our bond rating and also into our interest rate. Downside is that we have a large OPEB liability, our post-employment health insurance. Right now it's about $47 million, and so that brought our bond rating down. But they did recognize that the state does not allow us to reserve for that, so they did take that into consideration. And the other thing that gave us a negative effect on our bond rating was our pension liability. New York State pension liability is not 100% funded, so we have to report our portion of that liability on our financial statements. Again, they understand that we cannot fund that or make a reserve for it, so they took that into consideration. So that our bond report was an excellent report. Yes.
Oh, thanks. I think I have two questions. The first one is, you said that this AA minus long-term rating is the same as it had been a couple of years ago. Is it only done every couple of years?
The only time you get a bond rating is when you issue bonds. In 2020, we had to issue bonds for the reservoirs, and we also refinanced for our 2013 issue that we did then to bring the interest rates down.
Okay.
By refinancing, we saved, I want to say it was close to $300,000 in interest. So the only time we didn't get rated is when you issue bonds.
Okay, thank you for that information. The other thing I was hoping you could explain is the first bullet, where it says compare those with wealth and income metrics, which I think I understand. The second part, the local economy benefiting from a stabilizing institutional influence.
Yeah, what they're talking about is they're looking at, they go historical. They look at your large employers, they look at your population, they look at where the income is coming in from the city. They will compare it to prior reports and see if it's still stable. The colleges are here, the health facilities are here, Corning is here, they know that Corning is expanding. And we talked about all the different development. They know about Dietz on Lofts, they know about Springbrook project. I was on the phone with the rating company for over an hour and just went down all of our grants, all the activities that are going on in the city and things like that. And at the end of the conversation, they said, "Whoa, are you guys busy?" And so it was because of all of the aspects that's going on within our community. That's what they meant by that.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
And I did provide all of you with the full bond report so you could read it.
I just want to go to that bond report, page 4, where it says somewhat elevated debt.
Yes.
Just get your thoughts on what you read also.
The reason that they mention that is because of our OPEB liability and our pension liability. That's what they mean by the elevated debt. When you go to our government-wide financials, those things have to be on there, but they recognize that those debts are something that we cannot fund for. So they're not thinking that our outstanding debt is elevated. It's when we take our outstanding bond issues that we have and add the OPEB liability and the pension liability to it. That's how we get to that $25 million.
It looks like they also also take into account upcoming projects?
Yes, they do. We have to provide them our 5-year capital plan, and then they want to know how we're going to.
So they actually quantify the pension.
Yes, they will look at our pension liability that is reported, and they also go to the state and look at the state's report on the pension fund itself.
Other questions here? Jim?
I would just say to wrap up the 2020 financial update, if there are more questions people come up with for this again, you might want to add it to the finance committee.
Good. I'd like to take us into the 2023 budget discussion.
Yeah, so this year we're going about it a little bit differently than last year. This meeting will be much different in the sense that initially we want to talk about some of our major revenue sources, what the outlook there. Maybe by the end of this meeting we'll have some sense of direction or kind of understanding of what assumptions we might make in our draft budget for revenues. Future meetings, the next one that's scheduled is August 11th, and we're going to schedule a couple others. We're going to be right here interacting directly with department heads that are going to explain to you the different services that we provide in some detail. There's going to be a lot of Q&A back and forth, I think, between the council. It's going to be a special meeting, not 6 o'clock before a council meeting. They'll be on separate days. We'll have, as long as everyone's awake or wants to stick around and ask questions. The intent is to really drill down on what it is we're doing and how well we think collectively we're doing, and what are our priorities amongst those services we're providing. Are there areas we want to try to improve in? What are the challenges that our department heads see as obstacles to improving or to meeting our own expectations? By going through that process, that kind of helps our staff fill out their budget requests. We know, based on our discussion tonight and moving forward the next month with the calculations the finance department does, we'll know roughly what sort of budget we can be expected to have in 23. We're going to ask the department heads to make their initial budget requests to present a balanced budget as our first draft in October. Obviously, there will be things that we expect we're not going to be able to fund that we'd like to or we think are still priorities. So those are the things that we can key in on in October to see if there's things that we want to change. As opposed to years past where we've kind of gone the other way around, where we might get requests that are multi-million dollars above in the red where we have companies. And I think by going through with these discussions with department heads, it's going to be informative for everybody, the council, the public, department heads. So hopefully that will result in a better process overall. Welcome your feedback throughout. All right. Next slide, Joe. Our 5 major revenue sources, tax levy, of course, which includes pilot payments that might be applicable. We'll go through some more slides on these, but skipping ahead to the conclusion, in our mind, we would recommend increasing the limit that we're allowed to. We can discuss that. Sales tax, another big revenue source. Ginny will talk a little bit about that later, why we would recommend for 23 budgeting the same amount for 22. She actually already talked about it in the 2022 financial update, the reason why we're expecting to meet our budget this year, but I don't think we're comfortable assuming we'll get more next year. State aid, as Ginny mentioned already, there's no increase. That's not something we can control, but it is a significant source of revenue, so we'll budget the same amount for 23. Ambulance revenues, we had increased those a couple of years ago, the rates. We wouldn't recommend additional increases at this time. Of course, that's something we can talk more about. And one of the things we'll look at with the development budget is the actual number of calls. And the town fire contract, we're in the middle of a contract. I think it's in place. It is in place through the end of 2023. That's formula based. So there's not really a decision point on that. That's just something. It's a big portion, and wanted to bring your attention to it. Ginny explained, if there are questions, I don't think we need to. We've been through this before, but we certainly can go through how this is calculated. But see the bubble there at $116,738. That's basically if we were to raise taxes to the cap, that's the additional revenue tax levy that we can gain, here. Other questions?
This, maybe a silly question. Is this, so let's say we raise it from 1 minute. Is the 116,000, is it limited and can we use it with or can we apply it to?
This funds a general fund, so the only difference is it's not water, it's not sewer, and so there's really no.
So it's unrestricted. Okay.
Can I just ask, and maybe you don't have these calculations yet, or maybe they're here and I just haven't had time to look at this, but if we are talking about, I know we did this last year during the budget process, this dollar amount per 100,000.
We have a slide for that.
Oh, excellent. I'll wait patiently then.
Okay, so this slide just shows the last 4 years, including this year, what was actually in orange in the left of each year, what was actually increased that year, and then what the cap would have been if we had gone to the cap. 2019, there is no orange bar, there's a 0% increase. And then the next year. So, in a sense, we are leaving money on the table where we could be increasing our tax revenues more than we have. But for one reason or another, the council at that time had decided not to. The next slide. Jerry, if you want to explain this one.
What this shows is the accumulation of a cash flow difference of what we actually levied versus what we could have levied. The orange one shows you that we have collected through 2022 just under $600,000 in cash flow between 19 and 2022. Had we levied the full tax amount for the tax cap, instead of it being just under 600,000, we'd be close to 1.6 million. So this graph just demonstrates the accumulation and compound effect of leaving the cash on the table if you don't go to the full tax levy cap.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Okay, and what this shows what we did do versus what we did not do. So just to make it summarized, if you go all the way to the total, if we had levied to the full tax cap between 19 and 2022, a homeowner that had property, per 100,000 would have paid $196 more over that 4-year period. The 2019 bill would have been $31 higher, the 2020 $43 higher, 21 $60 higher, and 22 $62 higher. So we just wanted to show you in dollars how it would have affected a homeowner.
Any questions? So, essentially, at this point, is there any general sense or specific sense from anyone on the council as to what we should assume in our initial preparation of the draft budget? Obviously, as we saw in years past, the council in the last few years hasn't gone with the tax cap. Is there a general feeling about that?
One thing that just keeps going through my mind is how we've seen this year especially, how we've suffered and not been able to provide services by leaving that money on the table. Sewers, different projects. For the 196 over, granted that's per 100,000. 4 years, leaving money on the table is really going to more and more start to bite us. And I don't, for the level of services we want to provide, including clean water, I don't think we should be leaving money on the table anymore. I'm in full support of going with the cap.
Anybody else?
I just
Is-
want, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
I just want to point out that this slide answers Katie's question. So it would increase at $18, basically.
Thank you.
So the cap this year would be 2%, right? Because last year we went up almost to the cap.
Yeah, and on the first slide, it shows you the tax cap formula. So it actually, because we have a rollover, we're able to go up a little bit higher than 2%, but it is at max at the 2% for the tax cap.
I just,
Go ahead.
I'm so sorry, I did not.
It's either 2% of the cost of living, whichever's lower.
Oh, I just wanted to say, you know, the reason that I really like to understand that is because when I think about, you know, my monthly budget as a resident, what does that mean to me? So I'm assuming a median home value of about $250,000. So, and that's just, I pulled that out of thin air.
We actually did contact the county, and we got that the average single-family assessment in the city of Oneonta is about $129,000. And the average two-family house is about $131,000.
Okay, wow, okay, so then that's even lower than what I just figured out. So it ends up being about $2 a month in addition. So just so that everyone knows that number, onto your, already what your bills, monthly taxes.
Mark?
Jenny, I hear your voice in my head with regards to kind of water and sewer. Your voice is slow and steady. I think that slow and steady has been 2% is what you've advocated for in the past. I'm putting you on the spot, and my apologies for this, but you certainly have the most expertise in this. What is your thoughts about what is the best way to approach this particular, this tax? Is the slow and steady still a rule here, or not a rule, something we should perhaps abide by, a principle to abide by? Or is there other thinking that's kind of best practice thinking around this?
Well, the tax cap formula itself automatically puts you at a slow and steady pace. Because remember, even at a 2% or the tax cap formula, we're only raising $116,000 when we know, for example, if our health insurance budget comes in at a double-digit increase, that's going to be probably close to $300,000 just for the general fund. So this is a little bit of a different approach because of the state's formula that we have to go by. Now, you can vote to go over the tax cap, say that if something happened that we just needed to raise more funds, by 2/3 vote, you could override the tax cap. I would have to file that with the state, explain what the reason was for the justification, and then you're able to proceed. But I understand that it is difficult, that you have to balance what the resident and the community member can afford versus what service that they expect and the cost of those services. And I know it's a very difficult balance, but I support going to the full tax cap.
Thank you, Jim.
Any other questions?
Would you ever support going over the tax cap?
So
Would you ever approve going over the tax cap?
I think it would depend on the situation. So I don't want to give an opinion on that unless I was in that situation to say, yes, we need to support it. For example, in this, if we were given a grant and we had to match that grant for some reason, and it was going to be a great investment for the community, but we had to raise the money to reach that max, I would probably support going over the max. So I think it would depend on the reason.
And Scott, to kind of answer that as well, if we present a balanced budget in October after going through and talking about the services we hope to provide, and we show that we're not able to provide everything the way we'd like to, that might be the time for the council to consider, increasing more than the tax cap or more than whatever you might decide to pursue tonight. Our recommendation is let's start out with our assumption being a tax cap and go from there, but really if we're looking for a little feedback from you if you're willing to do that, or if you want to consider something else to start. You're certainly not making that final decision.
Not to interrupt our city manager. I think that I have to thank our finance department. Our finance department has really helped put the city of Oneonta in a good position that we are in now, unlike many cities around New York State. I think we've not spent when we've kept our tax low, and we've not spent over what we have. We've stayed under the 2% tax cap for, as far as I can remember.
Since its inception.
Yeah. I find it interesting that our finance department that's fairly conservative is saying to go to the tax cap. I think that's a pretty significant thing for us to consider. And looking at upcoming expenses, I mean, I would support going to the tax cap, at least seeing where that puts us, and then taking a look at the water and sewer rates, because I know that ultimately we're going to be in a good spot once we get ourselves up to that level that we need to be at. But I know this is not a conversation for tonight, but we're also in one of our committees discussing possibly seeing if there's a possibility that the city can do something to help parents in the summer with kids and supervision with kids. I think looking at this chart has shown how much money we've left on the table. And I think many other communities are able to help parents in the summer and have summer programs. I know up in northern New York, the municipalities do that. And if we don't leave money on the table, it's possible we would be able to provide something toward some kind of a program for our families that we're trying to keep here and bring more here. So because of that, I would be interested to see what going to the tax cap, where that puts us.
Anybody else? Okay.
So if I gather, we'll go forward with 10% for now. Okay. Sales tax, this is just showing what we've actually brought in each year in 2021. We mentioned the 2022 number earlier. We would recommend budgeting the same that we budgeted this year, just based on the unknown with the state calculation.
Craig, what was that number?
4.85 million.
4.85 million. And once we hear in October what the state is doing, you know, we may revisit it.
Right. Just a quick one, as we mentioned before, state aid, it's what it is. It's been the same since 2011. Certainly advocating for that to be increased would be something that we would support. NICOM has advocated on behalf of municipalities in the state budget process, but it hasn't yet been increased for over a decade. Next.
Just a quick question, just to help me kind of conceptualize this. Ginny, or Greg, or anybody in the finance, do you folks know what this is the equivalent to in 2011 dollars for the inflation rate?
I don't have that right with me. I don't know if Greg wants to calculate it quickly.
Less.
Yeah, since that.
Let's not waste our time right now, but I will, less for me to use the calculator. We can get that to you for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Quick, you're up.
Next one. All right, so now we're going to go through our current general fund reserve balances. There were more than this in the next slide, but we wanted to show these higher dollar reserves first. So these all have over $500,000. The highway equipment reserve, the safety reserve, and the streets and sidewalks reserve. And you just see the trends for each of those over the last 5 years. These are balances as of December 31st on each of those years. 2022 is as of most recent update, based on what we actually allocated.
Correct.
Obviously, the next slide shows some of the other smaller reserves, buildings, repairs, parks and recreation, parking, IT are all self-explanatory. Parking and IT are new. We created those this spring. IT intended to fund things like, when you replace a bunch of computers at once, that might be a big cost that we normally wouldn't have budgeted. Parking, if we're looking at paid parking potentially, or other parking improvements such as maintaining our parking garage and lots. restricted gifts, Ginny, could you just talk about that real quick?
Restricted donations, that is when we get a gift, for example, when we get the donations for ambulance, we get those on an annual basis. That builds up until we purchase an ambulance. We also have donations given for specific purposes. For example, the airport anniversary. All of those monies have to get approved by council, accepted, then we get into a reserve, and then through the budget process or council motion, we decide how we're going to spend those restricted donations. So that number goes up and down, especially because of the ambulance purchases.
So,
Can I ask a silly question? Could anyone from the community give a restricted gift?
They can, but it has to be accepted by council.
Okay. So say if someone wanted, I don't know, I'm going to use art because I feel like it's specific, but say someone wanted, to donate to Public Art, they could do that.
Yes,
Allocate their gift to a specific
Yes.
use within the city.
yes.
Okay, but it just has to be approved by
It
council.
has to be approved by council.
I've never known us to turn down free money, but
Well, there are some municipalities, so say for example, there was an organization that that did not really represent the municipality's values.
sure,
They may not want to accept money from that organization.
sure, that makes sense. Thank you.
So we show you these just to show you the general trend, and as you know, typically we add to these reserves when we have a surplus for whatever reason. There were vacancies throughout the year, in the budget year. This year we looked at it in April. We'll talk more about reserves as we go forward in the budget process and how we treat those, but in general, the way I look at these are, we have restricted reserves for the purposes they're created for. So you see in our budget requests, suggestion of using IT or the parking or whatever reserve it may be, because we have it for it. But I wouldn't say that, like right now, we don't have a limit where we say we want to have X amount in each of these reserves necessarily. I think the money is there for when we need it, and if there's a justifiable reason, we might request that. So just as you might see in our draft budget, we'll use some of the restricted reserves.
If I could just circle back to the bond report, this was a good plus for us in our bond rating. As I said before, because they're looking at a 5-year capital plan, they're looking at how much money we have reserved to go towards those capital plans. So they were very impressed with how active and proactive and forward-thinking that the council is as far as reserving the funds.
This just shows our total general fund reserves. It's just showing you what's been taken out, what's been added over the years. I don't think we'll get into too much detail on this now, but it's here to share the presentation. Next. We got a question mark here. There's not really a specific decision to be made now, but just if we collectively agree that we might have some requests for use of reserves within our initial budget request, is that acceptable? As far as restricted reserves, and then further, are you anticipating, or would you like us to use an unrestricted fund balance, whether it's general fund or otherwise, which we're going to get to the water and sewer. But last year we used $195,000, I think, restricted general fund balance. That was obviously top discussion. We cut some things to get that down to that number. Do we want to assume no use of unrestricted reserves to start this budget, or something else?
Yeah, I would assume no use, but I think, like you were saying, it's sort of a comprehensive discussion. We need to figure out what we want to fund, and then will the levy cover that, and then put that funding out like that. Okay.
Anybody else with a fund?
Yes, and
Everybody agrees?
Okay. Next. Water fund reserves, there are two: employee benefits and highway equipment. Same with the sewer fund. Slide. And then after that, we show been through a couple of waterworks presentations. We're not going to do the whole show. But just to kind of show you, a reminder of the different scenarios you can look at. Focus on the solid black line. And in this slide, you see diving down off the page.
Oh, boy.
That's not good. This was, putting in our financial model. We put in all the expenses and anticipated projects that we have for 2047. If we were to do 2% annual increases to our water revenue, we would not be in good shape. Our cash balance, which is that solid black line, would not be sufficient. So clearly that's not enough for what we have to do. The next slide shows a much more drastic scenario, which there's been some discussion about. If you get a 50% increase in the water rates this year, followed by 2% increases annually through 2037, and then dropping down to 1% through 2047, you see the black solid line climbs up. The black dotted line, pretty much the top of the peaks there, is where our cash position, where we would like that to be. That allows us to have enough cash on hand to cover our expenses, of course, but also any, in order to reduce our need to borrow, we wouldn't necessarily need to bond for as many projects, which reduces our debt obligation, interest payments, saves some money in that respect. It wouldn't eliminate bonding entirely. We wouldn't recommend going that route. And it provides a cushion for major expenses, unexpected things that come up. Third scenario, which is what we would recommend again this year. We've been recommending this, and the council has done this for a couple of years now. A 10% increase for water and sewer. We're showing you the water work, but we're recommending the same for sewer. 10% increases through 2026, and then scaling down from there.
Craig, I'm having a hard time looking at this with my bifocal contract, but I'm following the black line, I believe, how many years? 2027? What's the spread difference between what you're recommending at 10% through 2026 and looking up at 50% for 1 year and then going 2%? What's that spread difference of the black line? Because from my squinted view, it looks like it's a substantial jump in 2027.
So in the 50% scenario, 2023, it sets us on an upward trend right away. We're not immediately where we'd like to be, because that needs to compound over a number of years for us to get there.
Right.
It gets us there a lot quicker than if the recommended scenario, which is the more slow and steady scenario. It takes us a while to really get up where we need to be.
So can you tell me that spread difference? I'm right there. I just can't tell the difference.
Oh, you're on which one?
I'm looking at the 50% and I'm looking at recommended 10%. And I just can't tell what the difference
I
is.
think you're 2037, not 2027.
This one.
Yeah. Right here, right?
Yeah. What is that?
I think this is 2037.
I'm not sure.
What's it say?
This is 2037.
Are you talking about the difference between the solid black line?
Third shows on the right, red. Yeah, Joe's going right to it. Move over to the right. Oh, now go two to the left. One more. Red. Go red. One more red.
Oh, here.
Yeah, so that black line that you just referenced is at the top of the yellow columns on the recommended 10% for the next couple of years, or jumping 50%. I just can't tell the spread difference between that. So I'm wondering how much money is left on the table?
It's about $1.2 million.
Okay, so there'll be $1.2 million that the Public Works Department could be utilizing for needed water lines and sewer lines.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I understand that viewpoint of if you increase the rates by 50%, but I do not think, it would not be my recommendation to do that to the resident or our large users. If we were to have a rate increase of 50%, of the common person's minimum bill would go from basically $500 to $750 in 1 year, if we were to do that, or, $600 to $800. But then, look at your large users, which would be the hospitals and the colleges and the laundromats. They provide a whole lot of water and sewer rents, and for that to go up 50% in 1 year, I don't think would be well received by the public or well absorbed by the public. And that's why we have recommended slow and steady. That way we can compound as we go forward, and then the consumer can absorb at a much slower rate as we go forward. That's my recommendation.
Further conversation on this? Well, no, that's just a thumbs up, okay. We can move on.
Okay, so our initial run through the budget will assume the 10%. Okay, our enterprise fund, which is OPT, a little different, that's funded through our state and federal revenue and our fairs and contracts. This slide is showing you ridership on non-college routes, so not the SUNY or the Hartwick or Hillside College routes. 2018 through 2022. And we can actually, we can update this and go back to 2016. I believe we have some additional data show a little bit more of a trend. But obviously, there's a bit of a drop off in 2020, and it hasn't climbed back to where it was pre-pandemic currently. The 2022 projected, we have quarter one, quarter two ridership numbers, and I just, based on history, it's just about 50-50 between the first two quarters and the second quarter of the year. So we kind of projected those toward the end of 2022, where we think they might end up. So we're not sharply inclining at this point, although Dave, you can jump in if you'd like, you've started to see some increased riders on certain routes.
Yeah.
Obviously, this shows that Southside has the highest ridership out of our non-college routes.
What do you think the explanation was for the drop between 2019 and 20?
The pandemic.
Wouldn't have been.
Well, so the 2019 column, those dots are.
So those are final.
That's total 2019.
Let's find it, yeah, at the end of the
So
year.
then, David, what's your explanation of a 30% decrease since we're post-pandemic?
We're not having the riders yet, the college, you're looking at, assuming, the south side run right here, SUNY uses that tremendous. They go there, so it increases the ridership on that run. Well, they transfer down, take the next bus over. So you're seeing the reduction of users from the college. You're going to see it across the whole gamut of our runs.
So you're saying because the student population has decreased?
Not according to these numbers right now. I'm saying because of the pandemic, we did not operate to the college for several months in 2021. Now back here in 22, I would say yes, it's because of the numbers are down of students using the service.
Joe, if you want to go to the next slide, the reason we separated these data, students use all different ones, but just because of the volume in which we need to graph. So these are the specific college routes. SUNY, we have it broken out by the day route versus the night route, the Hillside route, and Harvard.
Can I ask a question back on the other side?
Yeah.
I just didn't see it, and I'm assuming it might be just hidden into the east end run, but how are we doing with our run going to Fox Care? Because I know that the east end run? Yeah. It's incorporated now in our Cooperstown run, but we do separate it out for statistics like this. It's doing well. It's doing Very good.
I need to get hold of my things blurry, I'm not sure which, so I apologize. I'm at the borrow.
Third slide is just showing the average ridership. So 2018 and 19, again, we can add in 2016 to let go further, get a little better trend, but 2018 and 19, college routes and non-college routes, you can see obviously the ridership is much, total riders are much higher on the college routes versus the non-college. You see 2022 projected. Relatively speaking, I think college overall, those routes are down about 56%, something like that, 53%, and non-college is like 46, 47. So they're similar. So as we go through this budget process, we'll look at this a little bit more in depth. We'll see as best as we can, guesstimate what we might project ridership to do in the next few years. Hopefully it's going to come back up. And so we'll be looking at, what sort of rate increases, fares for OPT might we need to consider in the upcoming years. For 2023, we're not recommending any increase because we have CARES Act funding, which can only be used for OPT operating expenses. So we're going to use that to offset any deficit that we realize in 23. Other considerations, talk about more through the process, use of ARPA funds. Obviously, we've somewhat committed our first half of the ARPA funds to park projects, and we've got a second payment to receive, still being discussed, so that will be part of our budget discussions. Those funds can be used to offset any lost revenues.
Can I ask a question about ARPA? You mentioned the sort of somewhat allocated first part ARPA funds. What, in your view, is like the appropriate way to finalize those expenditures?
As it stands now, we're proceeding as we have been with each of the parks projects that were identified. As we get ready to incur expenses, we'll come back to the council and ask for a budget consent. Until there's other direction, we're on our schedule of procedure for us. Obviously, the council then has to make a decision to allocate funds when it comes time. And if we not do that, in the meantime, we can talk about it.
Okay.
I think there was good reason to look at the parks projects. There's good reason why we chose to do that.
Yeah.
Small, but
Agree. I think there have been expressed, some desire for a little bit more oversight of those park projects are funded. And so, in your opinion, is that a committee discussion, potentially like click? Would you like the Parks Commission to look at the projects that have been suggested and talk about them? What way do you see as the most productive to get that council approval before we're to the point where we're approving a budget for
well, I guess just for a little history, the way we prioritized those projects was based on the New Park Master Plan, and that master plan was reviewed by the Parks and Rec Commission a few years ago, and then what was the predecessor to CLIP, Facilities Technology Operations. That committee had a subcommittee that I think they whether former council was on, we went through all those things and kind of prioritized them. And then we came to the ARPA, we were looking at the projects are fundable to the ARPA, what we accomplished, what are some of the higher priorities. We want to revisit that and redo that process. I believe that's the council. I wouldn't recommend doing that. We've got to do that personally, but
I think that when, just to give you my statement, I think that when we were provided with the first round of ARPA Parks suggestions, they were given to us in a general sense, of like, these are things that could be funded, let's commit to the parks, this is what we need to do. And as things often are, there's sort of this split, not that the background to it was hasty, but just that it was sort of like, we need to make this decision now, and you can look at it later, but then sometimes later doesn't come. So I'm just sort of trying to follow up on that. to just see, you know, if there is a sense that people still want to have a little bit more conversation about authorization. But I understand that you guys put a lot of work into it, so I don't want to discredit that at all.
I think if there's any more conversation, we'll probably take it.
And we could very well wind up putting together a subcommittee, maybe of 2 different committees to have a conversation around that.
That sounds great.
Could I make a suggestion? Because we're out of time, Greg, could we finish this at the end of the council meeting under discussion?
We're very close with this, actually. Let's push through to the end of this.
I think, yeah, actually, wrap it up quick. So, on this slide here, we had mentioned possible paid parking evaluation. We've been looking at that internally. We've got a team assembled as of today to really start diving into that. And then the mayor talked about getting some sort of ad hoc committee, community input, council input. It's certainly something we want to evaluate thoroughly before we implement anything. For the budget process, we're not going to assume any paid parking revenue for 2023. It's premature to do that, but we're going to continue looking at it. Same thing with the stormwater usually fee. It's an idea at this point. It's been implemented elsewhere. We think it might be possible here, so we're looking into it. We're going to continue to do that. Salary study, we had talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the year. We have looked into that. For $10,000, we can hire a firm that specializes in this sort of thing and do a comprehensive salary study, compensation study, not just salaries, but also benefits for every employee of the city. That's something that I think would be an objective look and it'd be informative to the council making budget decisions. If we were to enter into that contract now, we would probably have a result by November, maybe December this year. Probably not in time to make decisions in this year's budget based on that result, but it would be informative moving forward. We have contract negotiations coming up. I think it would be valuable to do. That's something that if the council would like to move forward with that, we could add an agenda item on tonight's regular council meeting at the end to approve a budget transfer out of general fund contingency of $10,000 to allow us to go forward with that. So I know that was something that was discussed earlier this year. We got around to getting it around.
Are we clear on that? Do you have any questions?
Can I ask a question about one of the other bullets? I want to make sure that comes complete. Just with regard to the stormwater user fee, I know you mentioned that now a couple of times. What is your anticipated timeline for getting to that, or potentially, hopefully, right, move that forward?
Within weeks, we'll be having some more conversations about it, for sure. I've looked into it myself, but I need to get everyone else in the city who needs to be involved in that, talk to some other people that have dealt with that and other municipalities, and really wrap our head around it so we can present something that's
Thank you.
Let's move on to target dates.
So we've scheduled August 11th, 6 o'clock p.m. right here in council chambers. First, we're going to have a Market Street presentation by our consultant Mendo, along with some city staff, followed by an additional budget discussion. So we expect a multiple-hour meeting that night. That's where our department heads will get involved in some conversation with you guys. I'm expecting that's going to take more than one meeting, so I think we'd like to schedule a couple more tentative dates in August. I've been thinking 1 week at a time, so August 18th would be a suggestion.
We can push through that at that meeting. We'll get everybody's calendars at that point.
Okay. Right, I can send an email after the meeting.
Absolutely.
See what we plan. Okay. The next few slides just go through our overall budget process. The red highlighted dates are in accordance with the charter. Those are our deadlines based on what the charter requires. So, thank you, and we will talk more.
All right, and with that, unless there's objections, we're adjourned. Until we bang this thing again in about 2 seconds.
Good.
Joe, need to make those back.
Okay.
You stand on it next to me. You stand on it next to me.